A big part of self-leadership is trust. I had to trust that even if I spent all my savings, even if I didn't get hired, even if I had to go back into the tech space and take an employee job, that I would be okay.
I came to understand, thankfully, only at 40 years old, that purpose doesn't have to be that grand. It is actually life-changing for yourself individually when you identify your purpose, because then you can lean into it. And that, for me, is where I feel in flow and where I feel really fulfilled.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Bold Moves How Did You Know podcast, a podcast for the naturally curious who wanted to find their own path. Here, I'm sharing bold move stories that propelled my guests from curiosity to action. And in doing so, they've defined a path that is purposeful to them. Through these stories, I hope you'll be inspired to pursue your boldest dreams. Hello, bold movers. I am so glad you're here. I'm being joined by a leadership strategist, and we've talked a lot on this podcast about defining your bold moves from your authentic desires, asking for help, and collaborating with others to find answers for your how, and then taking aligned action to make progress on your goals. But you can't do any of that without self-leadership, and that's what we're going to talk about today. My guest is Sarah Schneider. She is a professionally certified executive coach and leadership strategist who works with leaders to craft their most compelling and rewarding version of leadership and life. Because when you get to be the designer of your own leadership, she says, you can reduce the toll leadership takes on you personally, amplify the impact you want to have, and get back to enjoying yourself. Sarah has been focused on human dynamics and leadership for over 20 years, first as a tech leader and then as a highly trained certified coach with experience across coaching, leadership, technology, IT consulting, small business, corporate dynamics, team culture, and transitioning to the next big thing, which is what we're all about here at the Bold Moves How Did You Know podcast. Hello, Sarah. I'm so glad to have you here.
Hey, Kristen, I'm excited to be here. I've said to you before, I'm a big fan of all the bold move stuff that you talk about, and this seems like a good place to explore what we're going to talk about today.
We've talked so many times about all the steps in making bold moves, and I'm just excited for this conversation because now we can talk about what does it take from within yourself to make bold moves. You said bold moves is something that shakes your identity. So that is so interesting. And it's, oh gosh, you could have taken that question in so many different directions, but you started there. Why does it shake your identity?
Your happy hour was amazing, and I was super excited to be there, given that you asked us questions that opened us up and were like thought-provoking in a way outside of the normal, I don't know what I want to tell people about myself. And so that question has really had me thinking, or that my answer to that question has me put words to a lot of what I do, which is we carry these identities of, are we supposed to be people pleasers? Are we supposed to be high performers? Are we supposed to be workaholics? Are we supposed to be caretakers? Whatever we learn that we are supposed to be in the cultures and the societies we grow up in, those can inform a lot of our identity. So if you want to make a bold move, let's say you work at a job you don't love and you want to go do something more mission fueled, you are likely going to have to shake the identity that says, stay on this path. You've been doing this path for so long. You should be grateful. You should stay here, right? We have to shake up that internal narrative and that identity to make a bold move.
Oh, it's so good. And we're going to get into all of that because I definitely want to get more deeper into some of internal dynamics often need to shake up in order to make our bold moves. But let's hear your personal journey because I know you've had many different bold moves in making. I hope you can share a few. And as you're thinking about it and sharing those stories with us, it'd be interesting to hear like how those things shook your identity in those situations to really put some tangible story around what it looks and feels like to shake up our identities.
I feel like my whole life has been bold moves. And In the moment, if you'd asked me that, I wouldn't always see it that way. It's in the reflection where I'm like, "Oh, that was courageous," or, "Oh, that took something."
Mhm.
I think the first one that stands out to me is I was born on the East Coast, but I was raised for many years in Missouri. And
Mhm.
I had always wanted to move somewhere else. I have a great job. All my friends are here, half my family's here. Why would I leave? And I would leave because that is a dream of mine. I would leave because I have always wanted to live on the coast
Mhm.
somewhere. And so I had to disrupt this idea of that I'm on a path and I should be on this path and I have a great job and I should be grateful for that job versus how can I do these things regardless of all of that. And so for me, it was like going to my job and being like, "Hey, could I work remotely from San Diego,
Nice.
California?" Another bold move would be I've moved several times, but I won't rehash all of those moves. But I feel like moving from community or moving from family requires
Mm.
some boldness, right? In some ways that can feel like we're restarting. And so I think anybody who wants to move, there is a bold move behind that. But another
Mhm.
a bold move in terms of my journey would be working in the corporate world. I had a great job, I was paid well, it was stable, and I say that in quotations because stability is an illusion, but I had a good job, I worked with great people, I was good at what I did, right? It checked a lot of the boxes, but there was something that kept gnawing at me, which was like, if I'm still doing this in 5 years, this can't be it. This cannot be what I spend more and more of my years and my talent and my purpose on. So I realized I wanted to be a coach. I went through a coach training program, and while I was in that job, I left my corporate job and started
Yeah.
my business. And that was probably the most identity shaking thing I'd ever done because it was like I had an employee mindset. Now I needed an entrepreneur mindset. I had a lot of finances coming in. Now I had to be with like, what's my relationship with money? It was easy for me to sell and talk about the company I worked for, but how do I go and talk about what I do? And how do I ask people to work with me? There was all of these identities that I had to shake up to do that. And then I would say another bold move, and again, there's some other like geographical moves in there because I keep moving. But another bold move is I was single for a really long time. I liked being single. It was something that just was not a priority for me in my life to be in a relationship. And but I put a lot into that like single identity. And then I met somebody and I started a relationship with him and I had to really, like, reevaluate, well, what does single mean? What does being in a relationship mean? Where is there
Mhm.
overlap? How can I keep my identity and still be with this person? How do I be a good partner when I'm used to being
Right.
fiercely independent?
I love that you talked about bold moves from two perspectives. It's the career perspective, which I think a lot of times on the podcast, it is related to career. Oftentimes people are transitioning from employee to entrepreneur, or they have some other aspiration that takes the form of becoming an author or something that's like a creative interest or project that's in the fashion of a work thing. But I love how you ascribed life transitions to bold moves. Your move across country and then your being single to going to a relationship. And grounding that or rooting that in identity makes so much sense to me. When we make a bold move, we are shifting our identity from one thing to another in a lot of different cases. That's been the case for me many times in my life. But like you, I always had a sort of like whisperer in my gut saying, you want this, but it's so scary because I don't know what's on the other side of it. And I had never really considered, though, that it also caused me to shake up my identity. I always just felt I was very unclear and uncertain of what the future would look like in that new area of my life. But also, it makes so much sense about what you're saying. Like, so many times I've taken bold moves, it's been like, I have to have a whole new mindset for this bold move now because I'm not an employee anymore and I'm an entrepreneur. And what does that mean? And I don't have the steady corporate paycheck coming in every 2 weeks. So
Yeah.
what's now my relationship with money? Or even like going from single or relationship status to married. Is my identity a married person when I had been single for so long?
Yeah.
So that's really interesting perspective to think about it in terms of, and I would love listeners to evaluate that in their bold move. Like, how is it shaking up your identity in your leadership coaching, Sarah? When you all are thinking about new identities, what are some of the topics and some of the things that you might address to help people get over that fear or that doubt of what that new identity means for them?
I've heard you talk about the bold moves recipe, and anytime somebody comes to me, typically they're like, in some way they want to work on their leadership, or they want to change job, or they want to change something in their professional life. And I will ask them, what's going on in your personal life? What's working there? What's not working there? Because we are full dynamic humans. What is happening in one area of our life impacts the other. The identities we carry in one place, we often have in another place. So I want to know about all of them. And so I think of that as like the reveal. Who are they? You talk about, again, really being curious about yourself. And I would say that translates into anything. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of, where do you normally make decisions from? What informs those decisions, right? What narratives and identities have you learned across your lifetime that have you choose
Mhm.
something over another, that has you compelled to something or not compelled towards something, right? Like really digging into those things, because it ends up being, if we wanna make a change, it ends up being a recalibration from the inside out. I think about all my clients in this conversation, but one in specifically is bubbling up as we have this conversation, which is she's really freaking good at her job, and
Mhm.
she forgot that she was really good at her job. So what
Mhm.
she really needed support with is looking at the skills and experience and
Mhm.
background and wins and all of the, really, what's her portfolio and how can she get represents to that? And then what's the identity that she holds when she sees all the really cool stuff she's done and how great she is at what she is currently doing? How does she take that and be like, okay, now I can go advocate for this promotion? Or, okay, now I can define a role that better suits me. Or, okay, I'm actually have this other dream and I'm going to go do that. And these skills translate to it. So it's a lot of connecting the dots of who we are and where we're going.
I relate to so much of what you just said. When you were saying about your client who lost themselves in how great they were at their job, I relate to that because I think the working world, you can get so many different critiques and points of feedback that make you feel you're maybe not doing as great of a job as you are really doing. I used to really think that my career wasn't as admirable because I didn't have a Facebook on my resume or Amazon or
Yep.
Microsoft or one of the sexy technology companies. And that really used to get in my head a lot about, oh, I just haven't made it yet because I'm not working for one of these technology companies that were all the allure. And that was where all the people who were getting all the amazing opportunities were going.
Yeah.
And I really had to spend a lot of time with that, thinking about that belief. And actually, it was through the help of my husband. Like, you have done so many amazing things. Look at this list of accomplishments that I'm just listing off the top of my head. And that started to help shift me out of one narrative into another, thank goodness. But I think that's a real tangible example of what you're talking about here.
It's an amazing example because it's this interesting thing, or I find it interesting that I talk a lot about it and I know that you do as well, which is there's a lot of noise in the world. And it's only gotten more noisy when we have it at the tip of our fingers, right? When we have a screen that we can carry around with us and hear all the noise that we want. So we have so much noise coming out of us at any given moment, and it's really hard to hear ourselves with that noise. And at the same time, we also, people outside of us, their voice can sometimes help us find our own voice. And it's such a delicate balance because for the most part, I for myself and for others, I want us to quiet all of the external noise coming in, all the external noise that gets internalized and messes with our minds and derails us from what we're here to create in this life. And I most of my clients have a hard time seeing how exquisite they are because of the external noise. So whether it's from me reflecting back to them, whether it's one of their dearest friends, in your case, whether it's your husband, sometimes we need to let those that really love us and can see our greatness, let their voices in. Because you're right. I can have that same thing. I'm like, I don't have the fame that like some of these famous coaches have. And it's okay. I don't have that fame, but the effectiveness of my coaching and the relationship I have with my clients and the difference I get to make in the world isn't any less impactful than that person sitting across from me. And the same for you. So it's at some point we have to redefine. If I define success as being super famous, that's going to have me create in a way that's not aligned for me. If I redefine success as I
Mm.
support people in getting back to themselves so they can do what they feel called to, then that is where I align my actions.
I'm glad we spent time on talking about the identity piece because I want to transition us into the self leadership part of the conversation. But I think that having understanding your identity and what you want for yourself and who you want to be is a really important thing to know when it applies to self leadership. So I want to start with the basics because I'm not sure that self leadership is a term that people really understand fully what that means. So I would love for you to define it for us from your perspective. What is self leadership? What does that mean?
Yeah. In the most simplest terms, I think of it as ownership. And I would also say the thing, just what is leadership? It's like owning something moving forward. Right. But self leadership is looking at who am I going to be about
Mhm.
this thing? What am I
Okay.
going to do about this thing? And it's being clear that you are the most important driver of it. Now, there are things like if you are in a more marginalized identity, there is privilege. There's a lot of things that can impact the hurdles that you have to go through to achieve something. I don't want to step over that. There are identities that can systemically and
Mhm.
socially impact us. At the core of self-leadership, it's what can I own? What am I gonna advocate for? How do I chart this course?
Yeah, I like that a lot. It's like, how can I influence the things that I can control in the way that makes me feel proud about how I'm moving the ball forward? So now that we've defined self leadership, how do you think it applies to making bold moves?
I daydream all the time about all kinds of bold moves, and daydreaming about them and living into them are 2 different things, and living into them is the more challenging part. It requires change, and change is rarely convenient. And self leadership is okay, this is the bold move that I'm craving, or I'm craving a bold move and I'm not sure what it is. So then what are the questions you're going to ask yourself? What's the stake in the ground that you are going to own? And I want to be clear, this doesn't mean that you go and do it all alone, right? Because I think about also the second part, your bold recipe or bold moves recipe, which is the who. The thing that can be tricky for self leadership around high performers or lone rangers or people who are used to, the ones who are getting shit done is it can be easy to be like, okay, well, I'm just going to go. I've done everything else on my own, so I'm going to go do this on my own. That actually is
Yeah.
detrimental because change is scary. I want to be clear. I'm not talking for those lone rangers out there who are like, yes, I could just keep doing it myself. I'm like, hang on. Self leadership is also knowing that in community, in support is when we are more likely to stay the course on a bold move.
Just trying to make this really tangible for listeners as they think about, okay, how do I apply these concepts to my own bold move? So let's look at maybe one of your bold moves, the corporate employee to business
Yeah.
owner. How did you apply self leadership to that bold move specifically? What did you do that was part of your self leadership journey, let's say?
I always knew I wanted to work for myself. but I didn't know the what. And while I am a
Mhm.
calculated risk taker, I'm not just, "Oh, nothing matters. I'm just gonna go do this thing." I'm like, "Hang on, let me have some spreadsheets and
Yeah,
let me
really.
crunch some numbers." But I knew I wanted to work for myself, but I didn't know the what. I think I was 25 when I was like, "Oh, I definitely wanna work for myself." And it was then 6 years later I was like, "Oh, I this
Mhm.
coaching thing sounds interesting, actually, and coaching is a whole industry. That's very interesting."
Uh-huh.
The self-leadership part was like, okay, at 25, I knew I wanted to work for myself, but I didn't know the what. But I kept gathering experience and I kept paying attention to what I liked and didn't like. I kept going for opportunities and adding to my set of skills and really paying attention to what was available in the world and what might interest me. And then when I found it, the self leadership was like, okay, this is going to be really scary. I am going to have to risk looking really stupid because what if I fail? I'm going to
Mhm.
have to risk the stability that I have right now. And the self-leadership part is okay, but I know that I want
Mhm.
something else. I know I want to go have an impact in this way. Am I willing to lead myself through that? Am I willing to sit with all the really crappy feelings and keep moving? And so that's a lot of what it was. And I had coaches and therapists and I read a lot.
Uh-huh.
There was a lot of community in it, but
Mhm.
it's as we're sitting here talking about this, the word that I keep coming back to is a big part of self leadership is trust. I had to trust that even if I spent all my savings, even if I didn't get hired, even if I had to go back into the tech space and take an employee job, that I would be okay.
Oh, that's so good. And the words that come to my mind as you were talking about your experiences and what it took to take the leap was a real awareness about what you wanted. Even though you didn't know the what, you were aware that there was something else more, something different, something that you weren't in alignment with. And you didn't know the what, but you kept your foot on the pedal in terms of learning. I think it was like a learning mindset that you
Mm, yep,
used to keep your mind open, be driven by your curiosity to explore topics that were you were interested in, to finally land on that decision to this is okay. I think I want to be a coach. Let's now it's a whole new self leadership and yeah, like you said, trust that I can manage my way through this unpredictability that this journey is going to be. Um,
exactly.
so when somebody comes to you and that they might be in that position that you are in, it's I don't know. I'm having a feeling that I'm meant for something different or something more, but I don't really know what it is. How do you help them see? Are there any exercises or things that you say to them to help them realize what's actually calling them? Help them put their finger on it a little bit more?
Yeah, one of my favorite things to have people walk through is a what I call a skills inventory. And
Mhm.
skills, experiences, background, but it's an inventory of all of the things, all the skills, all the experiences, everything they know from like their very first job on. So, like for me, I started working when I was around 8 years old, and they were like odd yard jobs and mowing lawns and babysitting. Then my first W 2, my first W 2 job was working in a pizza place, and then I worked in restaurants for a while. And then, of course, I have my corporate jobs and then my business. But I have people go all the way back to the beginning and start gathering what are the skills they have from that? What are the experiences? What did they learn? And really digging into that because then we have an inventory of all of it. Then I have them look at or highlight what are the ones that you most love using? And we highlight those. And then we look at what are the ones you like least, highlight those or star those. And then we put that up against if they're in a current job, we look at, okay, how does your current job utilize the things that you love most? Does it utilize the things you love least? Like, where does that fall? And then we pause. So we're looking at all of this. The inventory is going to tell us a story. And usually in that story, there's a through line. When I worked in a pizza place, outside of the fact that I freaking love pizza and I could make pizza whenever I wanted,
Friend me some pizza that you make.
I should get back into that. But I was 16, I was making pizzas, like, I loved it. And yes, I loved eating the pizza, but I also loved how excited people were to get their pizza. And if I look at all the jobs I've had, there's something about seeing somebody light up that
Mm.
has stayed with me. So whether that be a when I was a business analyst sitting with sales folks and IT folks and HR folks all around a table and I'm asking them questions about what do they need the product to do and what matters to them and a light bulb goes off. I loved that moment. When I'm
Mhm.
working with a client now and a light bulb goes off for them, I love that moment because there's a joy present in it. So it's the same thing for folks listening to this call, right? What are the skills, experiences, and background that you have across your lifetime? Dig deep. Which ones do you most love using? And then think through all of those jobs. What was the through line in them that lit you up? Because there's likely something in there that you can be like, "Oh, okay, I love supporting people and healing. Oh, I love helping people make, calm out of chaos. Oh, I actually loved when I got to work with kids." Right? Like,
Yeah.
all of it starts to reveal
Yeah.
some things to you.
So when I was looking for my next step, I was ready for a change. I ended up getting laid off but I had started doing some self-discovery before that moment. And a lot of the work was around the skills assessment.
Yeah. Yep.
And from that work, I was able to define my purpose. I had always thought purpose meant something really big that just felt so huge and something like if I didn't do something on such a global scale and my purpose wasn't valuable. I think it's like that. I will back up and defend myself a little bit because I think we can all understand these external messages we get from society about people living their purpose and they're changing the world. So why wouldn't I have thought that our purpose has to be something huge? I came to understand, thankfully, only at 40 years old, that purpose doesn't have to be that grand. It is actually life changing for yourself individually when you identify your purpose, because then you can lean into it. And that for me is where I feel in flow and where I feel really fulfilled. And so I started to think about all of my experiences and my strength, as you were saying. And what I realized, I actually have three different purposes that I consider, but the one that I'm thinking about right now is I realize that I really love connecting with people, going deeper than surface conversations with people. I really like to get to the bottom of how people do things and why. And those realizations made me understand why, as a little girl, I wanted to become like a journalist on TV, an anchor, a storyteller. I actually wanted to be a sports journalist at first, but then as I was like, oh, I don't know enough about sports, I was still really compelled by the stories and the interviews that these anchors were able to have, like on the Today Show or Oprah or Barbara Walters. I was like very interested in learning about other people's stories. And I think that my career has gone in that storytelling direction. Wanted to get to the point of hosting or moderating or just having conversations, but like professionally, not just like in my friend group, which led me then, after I realized all of this, long story not short, led me to launching this podcast where I get to do that with people. And hopefully, some of the stories that are shared here help people live a more fulfilling life or understand something about themselves they may not have, or take that action step that they've been thinking about for so long, but now they finally have some confidence or support through this community to make that leap. So I think the skills assessment helps you maybe also understand your purpose, which then can help you understand how your bold move unfolds.
And I have a question for you. So you put a really high bar on what purpose was, right? And then you realize, oh, hey, actually, I don't have to get water to the whole world. I can have impact in front of somebody right in front of me. So you were able to see that you were allowing external voices and external noise to co opt what you cared about.
Exactly. Mhm.
And in my experience, it still pops up, even though I know it intellectually that I gotta serve the whole world or nothing. It still pops up sometimes, and it does with pretty much all the high performing clients I work with. So my question
Yeah.
for you is, how do you quiet it and as you go? Yeah, how do you quiet that big P as you go?
That makes me take a deep breath because I think I'm still a work on progress with that. I don't know that I have any specific clear steps to, say before the bus gets all the way out of the station, I am able to acknowledge, oh, Kristen, you're doing that thing again where you're letting outside influences impact how you're making decisions or whatever the kind of frame is around. I'm quicker at being aware that I'm doing it, if that makes sense.
It
And
totally
because I'm
does. Yeah.
aware of it, I can just shut it down more easily.
It sounds like you're in a lot of ways drinking your own medicine, your desire, and really knowing yourself as being aware of, oh, hey, at some point, I'm going to judge myself for my purpose. And now I know when I do that, I can slow it down.
That's the indirect benefit of posting this podcast is I'm the closest one to it. And I get to benefit from probably more directly than anybody. I get to benefit from all the insights and the lessons that my guests have to say.
Yeah.
And I think one of my strengths as a professional is seeing patterns and analyzing a lot of different data points and bringing them together in terms of, oh, like so many people have told me that this has been a problem for them and this is how they adjusted the problem. Or this is how I developed the bold move recipe too. It's out of all the 40 interviews, these things are present in the majority of them. This must be how people approach making bold moves. So yeah, that's been really helpful for me. And maybe talk to other people about that too. Sometimes the feedback from other people on what you're great at can help you see things you don't see.
For sure. Sometimes when my clients will take on this practice, a lot of times we'll do it on a call, but then usually if they sit with it, there's more ideas that come up or things percolate or they'll remember something. And I invite them to do it with a friend who knows you really well, somebody who's going to ask you questions. The other thing that happens is we discount what we know and we discount our skills because they're easy for us. So we assume everybody else could do them.
Yeah.
You think it's obvious and you think it's easy and you think it's a skill everyone has because it's the water you've been swimming in. And if we remembered that there's actually someone or something out there that needs that purpose or those skills or what we care about, then we're more likely to see our contributions.
All right. You have this resource. You probably didn't know I was going to mention this, but it's called Big Ass Daring Decisions, right?
Yeah.
Listen, the title is so aligned to bold moves, daring. I love that actually. I have never used that word before in relation to the bold moves, the concept of making bold moves, but you have to be courageous. You have to be willing to take a chance, try things. And so all of that to me is summed up in this one word, daring. I guess I'm curious about, first of all, talk about this resource a little bit, but secondly, what is a daring decision? Like, where did that come from? Why did you decide to create a resource all about daring decisions?
I have been working with a business coach who a lot of her lens is through social justice and like economic justice and like how do we create a business that we can pay our bills and it we can also have the business we want and a lifestyle we want and we can be giving to what we want. And also, how do we have things that are accessible for folks that perhaps can't work with you? How do we create offerings? All of that. And I was working with her, and it was important for me to have a resource that wasn't just a one pager, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? One pagers serve their purpose, but I wanted to have a resource that was very thoughtful and very thorough and didn't cost any money, cost you your time, right? Cost you your energy, sometimes some emotional labor, but it didn't there was no financial requirement to access it. What would it be like It's not the
Mhm.
same as sitting down with me, of course, because there's things I'll ask that are specific to you. But what would it be like to sit down with, a workbook and be able to do some of these things, without having to, spend the financial investment on it? So that's really where it began. I'm like, "Oh, I love helping people make big ass daring decisions." And then I was like, "I know, I'm gonna create a workbook about that." So that's where it came from, and the workbook it essentially takes you on a journey. You used the word discovery earlier, and I really think it is a discovery. It's about understanding where historically you've made decisions from. No judgment, not trying to label them good or bad, but where historically have you made decisions from? Okay, now what do you need to disrupt or what do you need to do differently? What are the decisions in front of you, and what are the values and the meaningful things that you can look at to make those decisions? What's the actual dream that informs those decisions? And then what's a project plan or a project design you're going to need to execute on that? So it's I recommend people take 90 minutes to 3 hours to really sit with it. So a lot of marketers would be like, "Not like the best resource for somebody." I just want people to be able to sit down with something and have some stillness and have some moments for themselves and ask themselves these very reflective questions so they can go make the daring decision or in your case, like the bold move, right?
If you're reflecting on a bold move, if there's anything that Sarah and I have said that you are like, yes, I just need to figure out what I want, what is my bold move, and then put some action or think through those decision, like how to make those decisions or what's informing your decisions. This is what you need to go to. So I'm going to link it in the show notes. I see in here as I'm reading the landing page, it says, you don't need another person telling you what to do. If you're not a leader, you're just taking direction from other people. And so I think, Sarah, you and I today are talking about taking ownership over the decisions you're making that guide your life. Is that a good way to sum it up?
It is. What do you want your life to say? And it's not easy and it's not comfortable and sometimes it feels really terrible. And most people have what they need to make it happen.
Exactly. I always reference this quote, but it's just so true. One of my prior guests said, you wouldn't have a recurring desire if you weren't capable of it. It's the same point. You can make it happen. All right. My last question for all of my guests is, what do you know today about being bold you wish you would have known earlier on?
I wish I had known to do it with more support and
Mm.
guidance. It's not that I didn't have like I said earlier, I had coaches and I had therapists and I had teams I was involved in all of that, but I was so my ego had me so resistant to saying, "Hey, do you know anybody I should talk to? Hey, do you know anybody that would be good for me to know?" The first couple of years, I was so resistant to asking for help that it took me longer to build than it needed to if I had put my ego aside and allowed people or invited people into being my champions.
Oh, yes. I think, and I wrote about this today on my LinkedIn, but I think we're conditioned, especially as an American society, we're conditioned to the individualistic approach. It's that if you work hard enough, you will achieve the American dream, you will achieve your goals. But it feels like you have to do it alone. And I made an argument today on LinkedIn that we need to reframe the narrative of success to interdependence, that success isn't actually created by one person alone. It's created by the support of other people who can provide help when you need it, who you can collaborate with on different ideas, who can support you during challenging times and celebrate the good times. You need a support system, right, Sarah? I wonder who it is for you when you've hit a ebb in the business and you're like, oh, I'm trying everything I know to get out of this hard, this ebb in my business. And I don't know what to do. And it's really taking a toll on me mentally. Like, you've got to be able to turn to a support team or support network to help you snap out of it. It's hard to do that alone. And I wish that there was more focus on this interdependence that of success, that it's not done by one person. It's actually done with a variety of different people who are supporting your bold moves or supporting your goals.
It's even when they look at, like, when all those, like, self-made articles and stuff come out, and then somebody will do analysis of it and look at it, and it's this person, while it may be very admirable what they've achieved and created, they didn't actually do it alone. Success does not happen in a silo, regardless of what your definition of success is, it doesn't happen in a silo.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today on the Bold Moves How Did You Know podcast. If people want to be in touch, where can they find you?
The best place is LinkedIn, so it's LinkedIn Sarah Schneider Coach, and then Instagram Sarah Schneider Co. And you can also always reach out to me directly. It's Sarah at sarahschneiderco.com. If you have questions, if you have thoughts, if you're like, ooh, this piqued my interest, but I'm not sure how to do this, like I have no problem communicating with you and sending some
Sure.
ideas. It's one of the ways I get to be my purpose in the world. So it's cool to be here. And I'm glad that we got to connect because you and I have been in each other's,
Right.
orbits the last 10, 11 months. And I'm like, oh, we think about things similarly. So let's riff on this.
I love it. This has been such a fun conversation, and so glad that we've put it on the calendar and we can now check it down. But I hope that one day in the future, you'll come back and share even more stories and insights with us as we all grow and evolve together. So thank you again, Sarah, for being here. And I hope people love this episode. If you haven't yet and you've been listening to this podcast for a while, I would so appreciate a review, and make sure to follow the podcast as well so you get the latest episode as soon as it drops. Okay, everybody, we will see you in the next episode. Bye for now.